light iron right here in Hollywood, Christian Ellis.
All right, so yeah, digital intermediate and the death of it. I think digital intermediates, it's more of a generic term we use now. I don't think we really fully understand, when people say DI, they say, hey, do you think you're just gonna do color and whatnot? But it really has an actual meaning and an actual workflow that's part of that. So what I want to talk about today is kind of what is actually a digital intermediate and why we're kind of moving away from that process now in the finishing world. So let's just get started with, why DI? Why did we start this process? And I got to take you back, all the way back to 1999. So I want to get you into the kind of back in that era and what we were doing back then to kind of get you into how this process started. So in 1999, Family Guy's first episode aired in 1999. So that's a long time ago, right? I mean, it got canceled, and then it got brought back again, so that's why it's so long ago. And then back then we had we had some pop culture. Anybody know who's the band was in 1999? Who's the biggest band?
Biggest band?
1999. Beethoven? It wasn't Beethoven. Yeah. But it did start with a B.
Beastie Boys?
The Backstreet Boys. I took that picture with my phone. No, I did not. I'm just kidding. Also in 1999, we had Y2K. Right? Do you guys remember that? Everybody was going to be out of a job. Everybody was going to didn't know what to do. And then we also had The Matrix that came out in 1999. Epic movie, right? And we also had Star Wars, Episode 1. Yeah. Come on, some of you guys did like it. But what's interesting about Star Wars, and I want to actually talk about Star Wars, is this movie actually is why we all work in 24 frames today. This is the catalyst into the new era of post-production. And that's because George Lucas said, I want to really get into working digitally, but I need to work in 24 frames, and it just wasn't around then. If you tell us I need to tape, you were working in 30 frames. If you plug your laptop or whatever into a light socket, it's at 60 hertz. So each hertz had to be a field. And so you had to have a picture that associated with that. So that's why everything's at 30 frames. So there was no way to make 24 frames then in a digital environment. So everything was at 30 frames. So no feature films ever did anything digitally. So he got together with Sony and they made the Sony HD Cam F900. And now that was a tape camera. It was 1440 by 1080. It was 8-bit. But it was the start of 24p because this company, Laser Pacific, created the algorithm for 24p. So these guys all came together to make this one movie, to make this one project, and they actually created 24p. So now we have a kind of the starting of what a digital intermediate process is going to be. Now we're actually at a 24p format, whereas before it just wasn't an option. You were on tape, you were at 30 frames, and it just wasn't an option. So now we're at 24p. So we're going to move on a couple of years now. So we're still at 24p, but there's just no way there's no real editing. So now we're still tape to tape. So TV shows would tell us they need to tape at 24p, but we're still working in a linear environment. So you'd have a machine room guy when you an online guy, so you'd be like, hey, put in tape 4, put in tape 7. So a guy would be back there putting in tape 4, putting in tape 7, putting in this tape, and that's how you would assemble your show. And same goes for coloring. So once you had a tape that was, your master, your video assembled master, you would have to sit there and color with someone that's shuttling back and forth. So if you said, well, I want to look at 45 minutes of my tape, and you're in the beginning, you have to sit there and you have to wait, and then you color that and go, can I go back to the beginning? And you have to wait there for like a minute, and so you couldn't just jump to where you had to go. And but we didn't know any better. That's just how you did it. It wasn't a thing. So a couple of years later, we kind of moved into these nonlinear systems. So these came out. So Avid, we were all offlining in Avid. So Avid decided to come up with the DS. They came up with the Avid DS Nitrous. And they made it possible to now online in Avid. So we would get these bins now, and we can literally just, we would still digitize tapes, but we were now working in an offline environment. So when clients would come in and say, I need to look at my show, we could bounce around and move things a lot faster because now we're in a nonlinear environment. And then Luster came out, and that was like, oh my God, what is Luster? It was like, we were in 2K, DaVinci 2Ks or DVision. DaVinci 2K had 2 power windows. That was your max. If you're coloring, you could have 2 power windows. In DVision, you had 1. And when Luster came out, now these possibilities start opening up. You can do S-curves. You can do unlimited power windows. It was just this giant leap in post-production. And even studios would be like, don't show this to DPs, don't do it because it's, it was so expensive. We've been doing 2K and DVision for like, $400 an hour. Now Luster comes out and it's like, well, it's $800, but DPs need it. That's going to make their film, really bounce. And then came out with Final Cut Pro. So Final Cut Pro was really, now it's like the do-it-yourself filmmakers can actually do it themselves. Nobody had Avid before. Nobody, some people might have, but you never find anybody that had Avid in their house. And if you wanted to be an editor, you really had to have apprenticeship. You'd have to get in the union. You have to find an editor that would really teach you how to edit. And when Final Cut 3 came out, you can go to Best Buy or Circuit City, if you remember Circuit City back then, and all these places. And you can really, get this at home and really start doing it. So Final Cut Pro came out, and it was really kind of eye-opening in what a lot of these people could do that weren't in the union or Avid world, and it really kind of opened up a lot of creativity. And it also, we actually started using Final Cut Pro to online, stuff too. So like if you walk into Target or Walmart or Best Buy and you see the things on TVs, that was all online on Final Cut Pro. So, it wasn't just, turn on a channel or whatever. There was actual content that, was created, offline in Final Cut Pro and online, just like a regular TV show. So now you have 24p, and now you have nonlinear systems. Now you really have the building blocks for DI. So now that we know kind of where it came from, we can really talk about the digital intermediate process. Now, when we talk about it, there is an actual workflow to DI, and it's evolved over the years, with the different technologies and stuff, but I really want to give you just a broad stroke of the digital intermediate process. So I'm not really going to talk about, a lot of the technologies that go in each step, but more of like, this is the kind of the workflow. So we're going to start with someone shoots an epic film, and this guy shot an epic film. And he's thinking, man, how am I going to finish this? Like, what am I going to do to finish this project? I really don't want to work in film. Yeah, I want to do it. So we came up with this idea of, well, let's scan it to a digital format. Let's scan it to DPX. Now that we can work in 24 frames, let's work in individual frames at 24 frames. So DPX was really a way to, scan individual frame per frames. We can scale it to whatever resolution we wanted. We can go 8-bit, 10-bit, 12-bit, 16-bit. There's just a lot of different variations you can do with DPX, and it's also standardized format. So Luster can use DPX, Baseline can use DPX. Even now that Resolve's come out, all these, finishing tools can use DPX. So now that it's on a digital format, now we can form it. And so we go to online, whether it be Avid, Smoke, what have you. And then we're going to grade it. So usually, in a traditional DI, you're going to online and, say Smoke. Then you might even render it again to another form, another DPX sequence and then grade it. Sometimes you'll just publish it and it'll go straight to the colorist. And then when you're done with it, you're going to make DPX again. So now you got the full show, it's titled, you have the effects and everything, and now you're going to render it down to DPX. So when you're done with it, now you got to deliver it. So what did we do? We filmed it out. So now we take, these guys are just going to film out and distribute it all over the world. So we're going to make tons of prints off of this film. So this was your basic DI process. You had film and you ended with film, but you had an intermediate process down the middle. So what's really changed since this? This is 10 years ago. So the delivery process has certainly changed. That was the first thing that happened. So now instead of film out, we're going to DCP. So everybody changed to cineprojectors, all the theaters have changed. Now instead of making these giant prints and sending them out, now we have DCP. So But still, the intermediate process has stayed the same. Like everything was the same all the way. Instead of filming out, now you just made a DCP. So we keep moving on. A couple years later, now we have digital cameras. We just said, films out. These digital cameras are awesome. Red changed how codecs can be used. You didn't have to have QuickTime or anything like that. Now we have R3D files. You can change deep Bayer settings and whatnot. Alexa really changed a lot of things with their camera, and you can have ProRes, ARRI RAW, DXL. Now we're into 8K and 4K simultaneously. You have Canon with Intra AVC. All these different things. You have GoPros that are like this big. You can go 4K. But even then, we're still in the same. We're still doing an intermediate process. Even now, when you go to certain places, they're going to take your camera original, and they're going to transcode it. So now you have your R3D files, your ProRes files, whatever, and they're still going to transcode it to DPX. And then it's going to be conformed, and then you're going to grade it, and then you go back up to DPX again. So the actual workflow really hasn't changed, much at all. So where do we go from here? Where do we go from this type of workflow? Technology has changed so much where you don't really have to go to DPX anymore, and you don't really have to go out of DPX anymore. So I kind of want to show you a different workflow that doesn't use the intermediate process and sort of gives us a kind of an easier way to work and a more efficient way to work. So let's just start over. Let's just not do a DI. Let's just think outside the box. So we're going to start with, let's just start with the DXL. And I could shoot 4K and 8K or what have you. And maybe you shoot some other cameras too. You shoot 5D or whatever. So I'm going to go right into Resolve. And Resolve is a great tool. We use it at Light Iron for television. And it'll take pretty much, there's not really a codec it won't take. So I can have Intra AVC mixed with R3Ds, mixed with ProRes cameras, and even the different resolutions. I can have HD, SD, all these different things, and put it all in one timeline. And then I can set my timeline to say, this is the resolution I want. I want a 2.0, so I'm going to say I want a 3840 by 1920, and then it's just going to scale automatically. I don't have to have my online editors worry about that. And I can change it on the fly. So say we've online and they say, we really want 1/7/8. So I'm going to do 3840 by 2160 and just change it right there, and it'll scale with it. So it's very easy to conform. So we're going to conform right in Resolve. So my online editor, some of you might say, well, what about fluid morphs, and what about speed effects, and what about split screens? And Resolve's really come a long way in doing that, and so have some of these other systems. You guys are probably familiar with Premiere, and you can online in Premiere as well, and kind of use these same kind of workflows, because all these systems now are kind of getting into these higher end conforming, because they know conforming and grading, they go hand in hand. That's the online grading process. Now we're going to grade this conform, but the difference is we're not going to make a new project. I'm not going to go and make a new timeline. I'm actually going to take the timeline that we online and give it to my color. So they're actually going to work in the same timeline. So we're going to grade and conform on the same timeline. I can do ACES in Resolve with my colors if you choose to say ACES, or the DP wants to do ACES. I can switch to HDR, and I can switch back from HDR. So if my colorist knows he's going to work in HDR, he can color manage his timeline to optimize his finish for HDR. So he can color his whole film in 709, and then he can say, I'm going to finish in HDR and color management to HDR and be that much closer to it because we're all on the same timeline. My conform artist he's going to title on the same timeline, and he's going to drop in visual effects, and he might even do some visual effects in there. We can do paint outs in there, lots of stuff we can do in there. Well, we're going to put in stock footage too. So right now, with all this that's being done on this one timeline, my movie or my television show is finished. My picture is done. And there's not a lot left to do except bring in my final audio. So now I have a complete episode, or a complete, all these reels are complete, or complete movie. And I haven't rendered anything yet. Everything's camera original, and there's no intermediate process. I've literally gone from camera original all the way down to the final picture, grade and everything. And I can even take it one step further. I'm going to make a DCP right out of this and go all the way to delivery. So for the first time, we're able to go from 8K raw all the way to your final delivery without rendering anything. We haven't rendered a thing. I can make my IMF out of there for Netflix deliverables or any other deliverable. I can make QuickTimes right out of the timeline. I can make MXFs and give it back to the editor if he wants it. So we're really not doing any intermediate format at all. We're going from camera all the way through delivery. And that's why DI is kind of not going to be around anymore. Pretty soon, other formats, you can do this in Smoke and Lustre. You can probably do it in Premiere. Final Cut Pro is, you can color in it. So there's a lot of these tools now where you don't have to do an intermediate process. It's more about, can you play these back in real time? Do you have enough GPUs or horsepower to do it? Do you have the storage to be able to handle all this footage? But if you do, you don't need to do a DI. But it doesn't, I don't think it has to stop there. So, we're slowly evolving, just like, we were doing tape to tape back then, and grading and tape to tape. Now when we do DI, we're thinking, what were we doing tape to tape? And now that we look at this process, some of us are going, well, why were we even doing that in DI? There was a need for it, but there isn't really anymore. So we can keep going. So what can we do to even, make this process even more streamlined? And I would say you can even offline in a system like Resolve. You can offline, if you offline in Premiere and grade in Premiere, if you offline in Final Cut Pro and grade in Final Cut Pro, there's benefits to that. And in this instance, we would be able to share the same timeline. So if I offline in Resolve and I'm grading with proxies that were made off the camera originals, they have the same file names, they have the same time code. So I can, instead of rendering something, turning it over, an XML or an EDL, I can go to my finishing house and say, here's my project. And so instead of doing a traditional online, they would just be relinking files. So I have my project that's linked to these proxy files, but I can actually give it the source files by just saying this is where they are. And the Resolve, in this case, is smart enough to know, okay, well, I'll just take that instead of the proxy files, and now my show is online in 4K, 8K, or whatever, what have you. And so then the process then is the same. We grade it, we drop in titles, what have you. An additional benefit to that is now I can do a remote grade. So if you did your dailies right, and they weren't colored, and you applied the color in Resolve, now you have raw color, you have log files, basically, and you're offline. And we can do a remote grade. So if you're in New York offlining, or if you're in Sweden or wherever, and you have internet access, I can say, well, connect to me, and we'll do a grading session. And I can grade here in LA, and you can see the grade off of your system with the proxy files. And so now we're grading remotely, and you can see what I'm doing and see the color being applied right then and there, because I'm actually controlling your Resolve with what I'm doing. So that's a huge benefit to a lot of people that I have an indie film and I can't fly out to LA. I'm in Budapest, and we can just do this remote session, and we're done. So there's a lot of benefits to doing your offline and your online in the same system. And this might happen for maybe not the remote grading, but certainly the benefits could be if you're offline and online in Premiere, or offline and online in Final Cut, or any other system you have. So I think just thinking outside, where DI is and what you think of DI, you can probably come up with other ideas on how to post your own show, and whether even you need to go to a post house. There's a lot of things you can do with the tools that we have now, that benefit, the not having a DI and doing things yourself. But, obviously going to a post house, especially with, these large formats, you get the benefit of not only the artists coloring, because, you get a colorist that's doing something for 20 years, it's not really about the color, it's more about the feeling that and the tone you want in your film. And you can get that with colorists that have been doing it a long time, because you can really literally tell colorists, like, this is meant to be a dramatic scene that's about this or whatever, and you can describe not in color but in tone, and he can color that for you. And versus doing something yourself, it's hard to put that into any kind of words. You just have to, you just need the experience in that. So, obviously go into post houses, you get that kind of stuff, and especially the systems and the storage. But obviously, if you feel good about your film and you know what you want to do, you don't really need to do a DI. So that's why it's dying. So, all right. That's all I got.
Question.